My wife and I had been looking for a new place to live. When we found that building, it seemed perfect. A quiet neighborhood, well-connected, and priced below the average for the area. It was an opportunity we couldn't pass up. The building had that old, majestic architecture that makes you feel like you've stepped back in time. A place with history, with character. We moved in almost immediately. At first, everything was normal. The neighbors were polite, though a bit distant, and we didn't see many people in the common areas. The only thing that struck me as odd from the beginning was that no one in the building had pets, despite the fact that they were allowed in the lease agreement. We didn't have any at the time, so I didn't think much of it. One night, as we settled in the living room after dinner, we heard a noise coming from the hallway. It was footsteps, but not the usual sound of someone walking, more like something heavy being dragged. We peeked out, but saw no one. I thought maybe it was a neighbor with a large bag or moving some furniture. However, over the next few weeks, we noticed something unsettling. Every Thursday night, the neighbors seemed to act peculiar. They moved with a sort of restrained urgency, as if they had some secret appointment. The older tenants, the ones we'd occasionally seen leaving in the mornings, were the strangest. Every Thursday, around 11 p.m., I'd see them walking towards the building's basement. They didn't seem to carry anything with them, or so I thought at first. My curiosity started to grow. My wife noticed my unease and asked me not to worry, that there was nothing weird going on. But I knew something wasn't right. Every Thursday night that I stayed up, I saw the same scene. Several neighbors, always the same ones, silently walking toward the basement. None of them returned until almost dawn. I always thought something odd was happening, but what really set off my alarm was what I discovered one afternoon. I had gone for a walk around the neighborhood and ran into a man who lived a few floors above us. He was carrying a small box in his hands. Inside was what appeared to be the body of a dead cat. I wanted to ask, but something in his gaze stopped me. He looked annoyed that I had crossed his path. That night I saw him heading to the basement with the same box. Then it clicked. This wasn't the first time I'd seen him with such a box. Every Thursday, several neighbors would carry something. Boxes, bags, or sometimes they seemed empty-handed. But their faces revealed a sort of dark tension. It was as if they were carrying offerings. My wife tried to calm me down, saying it was probably just a coincidence, that maybe people were simply disposing of dead animals. But I couldn't get the image out of my mind. Why were they doing it so secretly? Why didn't anyone mention it? And most of all, why did no one in the building have pets, even though they were allowed? One Thursday night after my wife had already gone to bed, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed a flashlight, put on a jacket, and silently went downstairs. The neighbors' footsteps echoed down the hallways as they made their way to the basement. I hid behind the stairs and waited for them all to go in. When the last person disappeared behind the basement door, I slowly approached. The door was slightly ajar. I peeked through the crack, my heart pounding so hard I feared it would give me away. What I saw froze me in place. The basement was not what it seemed. In the center, there was a large altar, surrounded by lit candles. The walls were covered in symbols I didn't recognize, but that filled me with an irrational fear. Around the altar, several of my neighbors knelt, murmuring something I couldn't understand. And the worst part, on the altar, there were several bodies of animals, some clearly domestic, others wild. Everything was draped in a sort of dark veil, as if they were performing an ancient, forbidden ritual. My breathing quickened. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. One of the neighbors, the old man from the second floor, lifted his head and looked directly at the door. I felt his gaze pierce me, and for a second, I thought he had seen me. I quickly stepped away from the door and quietly backed up towards the stairs. I ran back to our apartment without looking back, trembling with fear. The next day, we decided to move out. I made up an excuse about finding a better place on the outskirts of the city. I couldn't risk staying any longer. But before we left, I spoke to one of the building managers. I asked about the neighbors, about the basement meetings. His face went pale, and with an empty look, he told me, "No one has lived in that building for years. You're in the section that was closed off after the eviction. No one is supposed to be there." My world fell apart. Who were those people I had seen? What was really in that basement? I didn't want to find out. We left that same afternoon, leaving our belongings behind, and I never looked back.